My name is Pastor Sarah Stummy, and I'm part of the Synod Mission Table. And I am very excited and grateful to be welcoming Dave Daubert to share his work and his thinking with us tonight. The book that we're specifically going to be starting with, that Dave has shared, is called The Invitational Christian. And we'll have copies of it and be sharing that work. Now, Dave is a pastor. He's been at Zion Lutheran Church in Elgin since 2003. He's been in ministry with his wife, who's also a deacon, Marlene, and they've shared a joint call there for over 20 years now. Dave's worked as a church consultant with Day 8 Strategies, which is his company. He's worked for Churchwide in mission development, consulting. And something I've had the opportunity to learn from Dave in my ministry, to partner with him. And one of the things that I've really appreciated is Marlene, his congregation's commitment to their community. And really that vision for being the hands and heart, the love and warmth of Christ in their neighborhood, in very long-term sustainable ways. We're excited to share this book tonight. It's a book that I've happened to give out to a lot of congregations and used in my own setting as just a great way to engage and talk about church and congregational life. It's just been an incredible partner and conversation. So Dave, thank you for being here tonight, but just thank you for your love of equipping and sharing, and you have this ability to do it in accessible ways. So thank you for that. And I'll just say one of my plugs for the book, the chapters are short. And so that's one of the reasons that it's been a really great study guide for us, because there's more time to talk and think. So I just want to put that shout out there as invite you. So Dave, it just kind of to introduce us to the book, it really is a series of conversations that I think that you felt are important, a series of kind of topics around our faith and evangelism. So I want to toss that out and invite you to kind of share an overview of your thinking about that.
Okay.
And kind of your main goal in writing it, and then we'll go from there.
Sounds great. Thank you, Sarah. And thanks for being so kind. That was nice. It was nice to be introduced. My wife would have other things to add that would be less flattering, I'm sure. So it's very kind of you. Great to be here. I've known Sarah for actually quite a while now, because she was in Metro Chicago before she came up to Greater Milwaukee, and have been very blessed by her collegiality in the way that she's worked previously when she was on a Synod staff. And I used to be on a Synod staff, so I know what that's like and what that means. And Sarah, thanks for that. And Jamie, thank you for setting this up tonight, and the work that you do as well. Good to be with you all. Where do you want to start, Sarah?
So there's a quote. Well, let's just talk about, we were talking a little bit before we got, so this is a book that invites congregations to think about evangelism and being invitational. And so I think I'd like you to start just for anyone that might be thinking of a tool they might want to use, kind of what the core conversations are in the book. Let's just start there, and then maybe we can talk about a couple of them.
Okay. Well, I think when you think about this book, and I'm amazed and gratified how well it's been received. In fact, I just had to order another print run because I'm down to, somebody just ordered 10 copies yesterday, and I just ordered books. So it still actually moves amazingly well, considering I'm a self-publisher in a sense, because it just works better. I think what I've been gratified by actually is what you said at the beginning, that somehow the style with which I write short chapters with some things to talk about gets people talking about it. Because actually reading a book is almost useless if you don't take the next step with a book that's actually something of application. So I guess one of the things I would say is this isn't really a book to read as much as to A, talk about, and then B, implement, if that makes sense. And I read a lot of books and I gain a lot of things from them, but a book like this is really designed to talk about. So I hope our conversation tonight's helpful. And probably by the end of the conversation, you'll have a lot of the high points of the book. You might not want the book. It's like, oh, you told us what's in it. it's only this thick, you know. It's um, important. So I would say the first thing I would want to say is that you have to have something to invite people to, and that congregational vitality, um, meaningful discipleship, life-giving and engaging community involvement, all are predecessors to invitation. I visited with a church that's closed in South Carolina once. Its title was A Mighty Fortress. And the synod staff person that I was visiting with, I think, was almost lost her tongue when I said it. I said, you have to stop inviting people to this church. It's not evangelism. Because when somebody comes here, they don't meet Jesus. They meet a bunch of struggling people who can't pay their bills and hope you'll help them. So it's really important that evangelism not be a substitute for trying to find wallets with legs. I like to say, but that we really have something to offer. And I believe we have something to offer. We were talking before about the landscape, about kind of conservative evangelicalism and what mainline and progressive congregations have to offer different. And I think there are a lot of people in a lot of places that are hungry for something that the church could offer, and that we actually probably do better than almost any other slice of the church, but we lack the confidence and the trajectory. We've taught ourselves to shut up because we've somehow, it's easier to convince ourselves people don't want to hear what we say because it's permission not to say it. And now I don't have to be nervous anymore. I can just write it off. But we've got so much to offer in terms of a Jesus that is merciful, gracious, transformational, giving, forgiving, inclusive, welcoming, offering a community that is somewhat like the world in its makeup, but somehow different than the world, in that there's something happens when we gather as God's people in the presence of Christ. So I think the first thing I want to say is the first part of the book, which is really about why would anybody come? You really need to answer that question. Because if you say, do you want to go to church? Most people don't even know what that is. My own experience was my parents were not churchgoers, and so I actually never saw an offering plate, saw or participated in a communion or heard a sermon on a Sunday morning until I was in college. I went to my baccalaureate in high school. I went to funerals a few times. I did a little Sunday school. I dabbled in Sunday school, found it boring and a waste of time. My mom was not upset about that, so she didn't have to take me anymore. That was like fourth, fifth grade. But basically, I was completely unchurched. I mean, literally, I never heard a sermon on a Sunday, never saw an offering plate, never watched other people even with communion. So I was invited to church by Catholics at the Newman Center at Virginia Tech. And they were persistent, and I found there's something to offer there. But my point really is a lot of people are like me. When you say, do you want to go to church? They actually don't know what it is they're not going to. They know what the building is. They know that's a church, but they don't really know what we do inside. So I think we need to be confident that we can share what it is we do and why we come. And that's really the starting point. If we lack that message and that confidence and the ability to connect that, not just to we're the good deeds group or a bunch of nice people, but somehow we're participants missionally in God's bigger story, and that we can then tell that story both collectively. Here's what our congregation's story is, and here's how it interacts with my life. So it's also, here's what my personal story is. Everybody should be able to tell some narrative about stories. And we're all actually very good at storytelling. Scientists tell us that over 70% of all our conversations are mostly stories. We just don't notice it. When you come home and your spouse says, what'd you do today? You tell a story. Well, I went, I did this, I had this meeting and all that. We're telling narratives all the time. We just don't think about it, and we don't necessarily structure them. We just on the fly tell narratives freely all the time. But the narrative of church makes us nervous, and we really need to have our act together. So practicing that too. The third thing I'd say is when I go to congregations, and I have toured a bunch, when I was ordained in an inner city church that was on the verge of closing in Columbus, Ohio on the west side. And my best friend from high school came from an ordination. And when he walked in, it had a certain smell that old musty basements have. And he said, oh my gosh, it smells like death in here. And it did actually. I mean, we had a lot of work to do. And I had the largest building in Columbus, Ohio, in the Southern Ohio Synod, in fact, and one of the smallest worshiping groups there. We had 550 seats and average attendance of 40 at that time, which was actually in the 80s pretty small. Now we got lots of churches with 40. But he smelled death. It just, so quality. You got to clean things up. You got to put things together. You got to, and a lot of it doesn't really take money. It just takes caring enough to throw the crap away that's all cluttered up. And, yeah, that was a memorial gift in 1896, but it really looks stupid now. And that's just the way it goes. I mean, you got to be nice about it, obviously, but you don't have to be so nice that you don't get it done, because people are not looking for museums. They're looking for a living God, which doesn't mean you have to look like it's just built yesterday, but you have to have some sense that it's connected with reality. Um, I've got a good friend who's a pastor in Pennsylvania. She was the associate pastor in a church in Lancaster. She's African American, and it was a almost all white church. And she said she walked in there, and there was nothing in that church that said that there was any awareness of people like her. That the only reason she stayed there is she was paid to go. Now, eventually, she loved those people, had a huge impact. But if she had walked in that church as a visitor and looked at the place, she would have said, "Wow, these people have no awareness that people like me even exist. They might want another black person to come in and pretend to be white, but there's no sense that the artwork and the things actually looked like the community they were trying to reach." So you have to be ahead of your congregation, if that makes sense. You can't reflect your past. You have to reflect your vision, which doesn't deny your past or get rid of it. Not every old picture has to go. But you can't just have only old pictures, and it can't have clutter in the corners, and it can't smell like death when you open the basement door and all that kind of stuff. Quality matters. So I'd say those foundational things that you have to think about. Do we know why we're here, and are we actually accomplishing those things? So we have a sense of mission. Do we understand our story and how we can help people connect it to God's? And is what we do here at least as good as we can make it go? It doesn't have to be perfect, and perfection is a great lie, because it's never achievable. But the total acceptance of absolute imperfection that I see sometimes. I mean, you've all been in churches where it just looks like a garage sale. And it's like, no, if you wanted people to come, you got to get rid of the garage sale and at least look like you care um, a little bit about some things that are people oriented, not just piles of stuff. So maybe I'll just stop there, Sarah, because those are kind of foundational things. They're less the how to do it as they are, you have to do this first, because if those things aren't there, what you invite people into will not be engaging. It may not even be gospel, and it certainly won't be Winston.
So Dave, so like when we've used this book, kind of that overview you just gave, like, and there's some like real good nuggets in there, right? Like I'm taking notes. I've got, okay, don't forget these again. It's been a good refresher. So my experience of using the book just for the group is that those big categories, there's chapters on that and then discussion questions. So you can kind of delve into it,
Mhm.
so with that overview, that we've appreciated like that kind of practice with it. But one of my questions is, what are like, one thing that stood out to me in the book is really, and you kind of alluded to it with the perfection thing, is not to not to copy the latest trend or not, because I think sometimes I feel like as a church, we think the grass is greener somewhere else, or, and like, so what's your, how do you help churches navigate that or think about that, knowing they want to be about their future and they know they want to, try to reflect that, but they don't exactly know how to do that? What's your suggestion for that?
Well, I think first of all, have a conversation about what is it you value most about what is. You don't have to
Mhm.
jettison what is to become something you're not. You have to become the better version of what God is calling you and promising you'll become in Christ. So I think it just to take stock of it. And to investigate your own story. For example, the congregation that I serve, when I came here, told its story as a dying church in an urban neighborhood that was started by Norwegian immigrants in 1882. And that's what it was. They had actually, the last pastor left because they couldn't pay a pastor. I worked full time for Churchwide. I didn't need a salary, so I could come in and dink around with stuff and see if we could make it turn into something positive, which we've been able to do. But finances wasn't the big question in our case, because Marlene quit her job as a social worker, and I came between us. We added up to a person. We were like 12,000 below rostered minimums for first year calls. We didn't have any benefits because I already had benefits at Churchwide. But then we had to dig in and figure out what to do, because people don't really care that they can come to church because it's cheaper to operate. It has to also offer things. So I say, first of all, have some conversations with each other about what matters and what's there. And when you know your story, see if you can tell it in modern terms or contemporary terms, not just the way it was. For example, if I say our church was started by Norwegian immigrants in 1882, who built their first building in 1884 and was pretty much an ethnic enclave for the first 50 years, which it was. There were still Norwegian services happening here in 1928. They had English ones too, but it was 46 years between starting the church and ending Norwegian services. And when you start doing that, we can start to say in Elgin, Illinois, 47% of our population is Hispanic. I mean, we're having a heck of a week here with all this stuff going on here because the Hispanic people are the number one plurality in our city. We don't have a majority, but Hispanic people are number one. Now, if I can reframe that, we were an immigrant church that for the first 50 years understood the immigrant experience and provided an ethnic experience to help these people begin to root and to have faith and to grow. And that eventually out of that ethnic experience, they transitioned into a new chapter. I can then take my story and make it basically repeat in the Hispanic story of the people who've come to Elgin in the last 50 years. And say, so we actually in our roots, we know what it is to be an immigrant church. We know what it is to enter a majority culture and have language and culture issues that are foreign to us, and to need a place that allows us to flourish and grow as we learn to get roots in this community. And means when one of my people grumbles, why don't these people learn English? I can say, well, for the same reason your great-grandmother didn't learn English, and we had 46 years of Norwegian services here, because it takes a while, especially for first generations. And they smile and they shut up in a good sense. I mean, it's not harassing. Remember, that's right. Actually, this is exactly how it works for every human being who leaves where they were and does it. Now, so think about your story. How can you retell your story in a way that actually makes a segue into the culture that you have? That doesn't just affect the Hispanic people who could care less about the Norwegian thing. It reframes the people you are. We are more compassionate collectively as a church because we have a root that understands what it means to be an immigrant. And being able to tell our story that actually changed us collectively to say, that's right. This church wouldn't be here if it weren't for people who for the first 50 years needed to sort of root and do those things. And we can be sympathetic and empathetic and helpful even to people going through the exact same thing that our great-grandparents went through. Now, most of our great-grandparents aren't even our great-grandparents because the number of Norwegians we got left is pretty small. But reframing a story is just an amazing way to do that. So I'd say that's where I would start. Start with your values, start with what's important, start with your story, and think about how could we retell our story in a way that better connects with the people in our community that we're trying to interact with.
Thank you for just that power of reframing. But what I appreciated too is, and we talked a little bit earlier about confidence, but reframing it as part of God's story, really and not just the positives, but really taking that step back and seeing, what's happened and how I love that idea of how it's connected. So we were sharing a little bit about and I think it ties in with that of that sense of confidence, or maybe it's humility, we're not going to speak about, what we can share because we want to be humble, or we're not sure that we're relevant enough to the culture, and we need to come somewhere. Do you have any words of encouragement about that? And maybe it's what you just shared, but that sense of confidence.
Oh, confidence is a lot of everything. A gift not utilized is still a gift. It's just not utilized. And so if you lack confidence and don't use the gifts you have, then they just get squandered. And I see that everywhere. I see it individually among us. I would include myself in that sometimes. For example, if I want to go out and meet people in the community, I hate the idea of knocking on someone's door. I do. So if I go out, and I don't do a lot of door knocking, but if I just want to go out and meet some people and say, I'll just go talk to someone, and I knock on a door, I still sort of hope they're not home. I do. But what I've learned is I actually hate the idea of knocking on doors less than I like knocking on door, and the idea of talking to
Mhm.
strangers less than actually talking. I almost always have good conversations, and I'm almost always glad I did it. And so it's a little bit like eating broccoli the first time if you're not into vegetables for a while. A lot of times you discover that it's not what you thought it was, but your fear of or dread of the thing is worse than the reality. And I think that's what I would see eventually over and over,
Mhm.
that people are afraid to talk about their faith. They lack confidence. Uh,
Mhm.
I tell people, one of the best things that can happen to you, people say, what if they ask me a question I don't know? And I think, oh my gosh, that's like, that's the low hanging fruit, right? That's the best thing that could possibly happen. Because if suppose, Sarah, you ask me a question and I say, geez, I don't know. That's interesting. Let me see what I can find out and I get back to you. You've actually asked me for a second conversation about my faith because I've got a question I can't answer. And I can come back and say, I was talking about that. I went to church and talked to some friends of mine. I did a little Google on online work. I talked to our pastor, and here's what I've come up with. Here's some things. Now I got a whole second conversation by being stupid. Now, if I'm smart, I answer the question, we're done. We're done. But actually, if I'm humble enough to not know and curious enough and
Mhm.
care enough about you to work on it, a lot of the things we're afraid of really aren't that scary. They're just kind of the low-hanging fruit for excuses. And once I
Mhm.
can talk myself out of, I'm a little nervous, I better not, and I got a reason to come up with, that's why I cannot do it. And I believe it. I've sort of shut myself down, and it actually has nothing to do with what I'm afraid of. It has to do with what's inside of me that I'm nervous about.
Mhm.
Confidence is so important.
Mhm.
And I can't tell you how many times people do something and they say they're sorry, and it's not really anything to be sorry about. We're just always apologizing for being us, and I don't think we need to quite so often. And people are hungry for what we got if we share
Mhm.
it graciously.
And so we're working on a project, and the sat that came up in church on Sunday was 80%. We talk ourselves out of 80% of the conversations we want to have. That's a high number. So I'd love that, 80%, and it's all we talk ourselves out of it, like a variety of reasons.
But just think
So
about all of us who are parents, and think about having the talk about sex with your kids. And every parent knows they're supposed to have it, and 80% of them don't.
mhm.
Right? It's not because we don't know we should. It's just, oh, that's uncomfortable. But it would be like really useful. Your kid
Mhm.
probably would function a lot better if you do that. But we always talk ourselves. I mean, everybody knows lots of conversations like that
Mhm.
with friends, spouses, coworkers, neighbors. But you're right, we talk ourselves up.
Mhm. So I've got before we kind of open it up, and I just want to invite if folks have questions, we could put them in the chat. Maybe we could ask. We've got a amazing congregationalists in our midst, but Dave, we one thing is so you've engaged the church in a conversation like why knowing and reframing your story, kind of building that confidence to connect to it, inviting like leadership teams, groups to have those conversations, to assess, kind of our surroundings, really think about what we can do to make it in practical ways. So that's the kind of the trajectory of the book as it is. Since you've written it, what new conversations might you add, or what have you written new chapters, and what are you inviting people to think about and talk about now?
Well, I'd say the first thing I'm talking about is the chapter 6 is really the heart of the book, the importance of with, and that has not changed.
Okay.
That people still need people. In fact, in some ways, that's been amplified. That if somebody comes to church on their own, the likelihood of their experience being good is diminished dramatically versus if they come with somebody they know. Walking into a strange building by yourself is nerve wracking. Sitting in a seat by yourself is nerve wracking. Navigating a worship experience you're unfamiliar with is nerve wracking. It's anxiety producing.
Mhm.
In fact, we have people who haven't been to our congregations for a while who go to the same congregation. They're nervous when they come back, just because they think, oh, I'm going to be judged and we're not being there, or they've changed a bunch of things. I'm going to look stupid. Somebody's going to ask me if I'm new, and I'm going to have to say I've been here 32 years, but I haven't come for the last 10. So people who come to our churches are sometimes nervous. Think about if you don't. So with, and the best thing anybody can do is say, um, let's suppose Marilyn, who's here, is my friend on the screen. And I say, Marilyn, I'd like you to come to church with me Sunday. We worship at 10:45. Could I swing by about 10:15 and pick you up?
Mhm.
If you care enough about somebody to offer a ride, it's really hard for them to say no if they trust you and you built that kind of a thing. And
Mhm.
it's very hard for them to have a bad experience because you walk in with them, you navigate things for them, you introduce them to your friends. There's just nothing like having a companion who knows what they're doing when you're doing something new. Now,
Mhm.
having said that, a lot of other things have changed, mostly in degree more than in like a new thing. But I'd say one thing that's changed that I would emphasize more, and when I rewrite this book um, in the year ahead, in and it was before COVID too. In 20, I think 16, Great Britain changed the cabinet position to include a minister of loneliness.
Mhm.
That people's sense of isolation, and a lot of this has to do with technology and social media, people texting instead of actually being together, um, is real. And then COVID basically took loneliness, which was already escalating enough that it was somewhat of a crisis that was growing, and it put it on steroids. I mean, it was like exponential. In a sense, everybody was required not to do things. We actually told people for a year, don't come to church, don't come to church, don't come to church. You can do it on technology. You can watch on your screen. You can watch it on your phone, which is what they've been doing with like every other aspect of life already. So we descended into the loneliness pit, if you will, of technology and social media and isolation. And a lot of people haven't really found their way out. Loneliness is higher now than it was before COVID. Um, One thing that's changed, young people are much lonelier now than they were 10 years ago. Um, the largest group of lonely people are over age 70. The second largest group of lonely people are 18 to 24-year-olds. When people leave high school and all their social things, networks and things disappear and everybody scatters to wherever they go, they have a real tough time navigating. And so um, I think one thing church has to do better is build community. And we have to be careful that we're not building a club like Friends,
Mhm.
but that it's a different kind of community that's grounded in Christ, that understands its identity as a part of the body of Christ, that's got a sacramental character to it, that we are Jesus for each other. Um, that kind of stuff is really important. And I didn't emphasize that near as much in the book before when I wrote the book than I would now. I think a second thing that's changed is before COVID, almost nobody streamed. I mean,
Mhm.
big churches did, but in general, the average congregation was not a streaming place. After COVID, a lot of congregations stream. And we're pathetic at using our streams. I mean, I wrote a book called Becoming a Hybrid Church, which is more relevant now than when I wrote it, because now we actually can be a hybrid church again, because I wrote it during COVID when we had to be online mostly. Most of us have done a terrible job of our online work, just terrible. We basically have cameras that broadcast our services, but we don't interact well. Um, we don't utilize them well. Let's suppose on a given Sunday, I give a sermon on a topic, and Greg Van Dunk's here. How you doing, Greg? Good to see you. Greg's my friend, and I give a sermon. Greg's my friend. He's a member of my parish. He heads back to work on a Monday morning. He's not actually Pastor Greg Van Dunk. He's an engineer or a school teacher or something. And somebody at his work says, "Greg, how was your weekend? What'd you do?" And if you're a typical person, you went to church but didn't go to a concert, didn't go to a football game, nothing special. It's kind of typical. But if Greg's sharp, he can say, "Hey, I did the same thing I often do. We go to church. You know, church is very important to my
Mhm.
family." And so it was kind of a typical weekend. And we went to church. In fact, we were talking last week about, this thing. And with Pastor Dave was talking this week, he said something I think you would have liked to hear. Let me send you the link to our service. And I'll give you the place where he talked about it, and you can watch it later. Because now you can try before you buy, right? If on Friday you're in Pastor Dave's church and you're thinking, I wonder if Pastor Dave's sermon's going to be good or if it's going to suck this week. You're really, because who knows, right? You haven't heard it. You just never know when Pastor Dave's going to be on or off. You're just thinking, I just don't know. But now you can say, yeah, Pastor Dave's sermon was actually pretty decent this week. It would have been a good week to invite people. You can actually invite people on Monday now. Isn't that cool?
Mm.
If you could teach people to say, this sermon on service or
Mhm.
relationships or whatever was really relevant to something, and that three of your friends are wrestling with relationships or wishing the church was doing more service, or who knows what those things are because you're having these conversations. You can now take them your YouTube link or your Facebook Live link and send it to them and say, the sermon starts at 14 minutes and 31 seconds into the service. I think you should listen to it. And they can, and a lot of the people will. And what an amazing event. We had none of that before. You had to gamble that the sermon and the service and things are going to be relevant. The organist is on vacation, and now we got Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so substituting. The music's pathetic this week. Next week it'll be great because the organist will be back. But those kind of things are variables that small churches we just all wrestle with, right?
Mhm.
But you can actually decide if it was a good week and do it afterwards. What an exciting opportunity. And every one of us should be teaching our people on Monday morning, who do you need to send the sermon to? On Monday morning, who do you need to send a sermon to? On Monday morning, who do you need to send the sermon to? Just drill it back into people, because we can do things after now we could never do before COVID. And then the third thing is online is more and more important. I don't know if you know, but one of the things, and it's not easy to maintain this, but Google gives free $120,000 grants to every nonprofit pretty much that applies for it. You can get $10,000 a month in free advertising from Google every month for the rest of your history, probably. Because Google makes a boatload of money on selling ads to people, and then they need tax write-offs. So for every 120,000 they take on an income, if they give away $120,000 in in-kind services to nonprofits, they pay no tax on their money, because it's all write-off to donations. So they donate, and all of you are eligible to use Google advertising for free. You got to apply. You got to use it well. You have to have a 5% click-through rate. It's not easy to do. I'm not saying that all of you even should do this, but the access to online things for free. I mean, Google kind of runs the world, for good or for bad. We all Google search things. And if you want your church to be found, it's much easier now than it ever was before. So I would say emphasizing community. I think taking advantage of the fact that we can stream and invite people after the fact to something that's actually, we know this was relevant for so-and-so this week. You can actually connect a real person with a real sermon one-to-one. And I think the change in online presence work and publicly kind of putting ourselves forward with things like Google have radically changed. I'll stop there.
Thank you. I was thinking, so in the book, in your new version, is it a whole separate book, or is it going to be add-on? Like, are you still doing the basics and then the add-on chapters, or is it a second part 2? Do you know yet?
I think I'm going to redo the whole thing, because every chapter has something. So I think it's going to be like a second edition.
Okay, perfect.
Because I think most of the, to be honest, if I never updated this book, most of the fundamentals, there's nothing in here that's not still relevant.
Yeah.
What's changed is how it's relevant, or some things that aren't in here because of things that are changed. There's new opportunities and ways of engaging. So, I mean, one of the reasons I write what I hope are good books is that there's really nothing that radically, they're pretty well grounded in basic kinds of things. And the basics haven't changed since Jesus, right? You know, you got Jesus, and he's like worth inviting into and changing the world, and people who follow him are excited about it, and they have a story to share, and they invite people to come and see, and they do. I mean, so, as good as this book may be, in some sense, it's a invitational church for dummies, in a sense, because you don't need to know that much. Everybody who reads this book will say, well, I sort of knew all that. But yeah, we never talked about it. We don't do it, and knowing it and doing aren't the same thing. But yeah, so this book, if you never bought the next book and you heard those things, you'd be fine. But hopefully the next book will be better.
Thank you. So, Jamie, I think if we could, if there's questions, and we could do raise of hand, or we can do in the chat. But if folks have questions for Dave, I think it'd be great to kind of check and see in the group if we've got anything we'd like to ask him. And then we can call and unmute.
Yeah, I'm pretty flexible. Whatever
We
format.
don't have any questions in the chat right now, but if you are a person who doesn't want to unmute and ask a question out loud, put your question in the chat and I will ask it for you. Otherwise, raise your hand and we'll call on you.
Such a quiet group tonight.
Okay, I'm gonna ask Mike. Oh, Tom's got one.
I just want to affirm what you just said about the opportunity to be invitational through sending the link, the service, the point, whatever it is. That's ingenious. I mean, it's like, duh, why haven't we been doing that? And I do send things. I did this week because we spoke on a mission trip that we did, and I've been sending that out. But I haven't encouraged the congregation. I mean, it's that 180-year-old Norwegian congregation. Only a few representatives left from the Norwegian village.
Hey,
They're
that
right
sounds
here.
like my church. Mine's
Yeah,
only
they're right here, George and Elaine. But seriously, that's such an easy thing to do and encourage. And it's getting them in the front door, which tends to be people's website, and even getting into church, but not having to take the risk to do it. But it's taste and see.
related to that, Tom. I think, I haven't talked about websites, but here's the truth. If I invite you to my congregation, as I'm a lay person, I go to work, I invite a co-teacher, a person who's engineer at my company, whatever those things are, and they decide to come, and I invite them on a Thursday. Hey, I'd like you to come to church with me on Sunday. I'll pick you up. We know that over half of those people are going to go to the website at the church and see what they've gotten themselves into.
Yes. Yes.
People may find you because of the website, but even more likely is they'll find your website because of your people. And that once you invite somebody to, in my case, Zion Lutheran Church in Elgin, people are going to go to the website at Zion Lutheran Church in Elgin and say, what the heck have I done? And then they're going to see a link that they can watch last week's broadcast. They're going to find some things about it, and they'll see, in our case, that we're reconciling in Christ congregation, and that we have a statement of inclusion and welcome, and those kind of things will tell them, what's going on. This other thing, Facebook, same way. I have a person that just came, a couple, married couple, probably, I don't know how old yet. I'm just getting to know them. They just came last week, but late 20s, I have a 2-year-old. They tried a church not too far from them that was a Missouri Synod congregation, and they felt like it just was for them, very conservative, just didn't feel right. So they went online and started looking, and they saw our Facebook page, and they saw we were reconciling in Christ and had a different stance towards things, and they came to church. They found us online. They don't know anybody, but they came, and because our Facebook and website presents something, and it was an alternative to the other kind of church. In a sense, we got kind of camps going on. It's a sad thing, but there's really 4 kinds of churches in the United States that most people encounter. One is Roman Catholic, old school, conservative. Priests should be men, not ordained. Women should not be. And one is more progressive Catholics, like the Richard Rohr kinds of people that are, from our perspective, almost Lutherans. It looks like they're sacramental, but they're the kind of the more North American unique Catholics. They're kind of unique on the global scale. So you've got kind of the rules and the grace camp in the Catholic Church. And then you got the evangelicals, who tend to have the same thing, more rules, more judgment, and the mainline progressive churches, which tend to have more grace. In general, you have to tell people, are you a Catholic or a Protestant? Maybe, but you definitely have to tell them whether you're a judgment or a grace place. And we're a grace place. And this family went to church and they said, oh, this is a judgment place. This is not what we're looking for. And they kept looking. Another family that we had join our church after COVID, they stopped going during COVID, and they decided they couldn't bring their kids anymore to where they were. It was a judgment place. It had purity rings and stuff. Their kids were getting to that age, and they'd grown up in that, but they sort of couldn't do it to their kids. So they came looking for a different kind of a church, and saw, again, Reconciling Christ, a welcome inclusion. It was a grace place. And they decided to come, even though his dad's still a practicing Southern Baptist preacher. So, I mean, that's a very interesting family now, but people need to know is what it is. And what we offer, in my opinion, as Lutherans, is we are justified by grace through faith. And love precedes everything else. We're not loved by God because we're worthy. We're worthy because we're loved by God. Our worth comes because God has already decided that we are loved. And that ought to be on your website. It ought to be up front. The Episcopal bishop, they got a lot of garbage last week for the stuff with the prayer thing. Got a lot of garbage because she was in the grace camp and the mercy and love camp, and she announced that in a way that felt challenging to the law people who just wanted to figure out who was wrong and start out with a big punitive agenda. You know, you don't want to be too political, I know, but at the same time, which side of the judgment versus grace are you on? Tell people. People who want judgment aren't going to be happy in your church if you're not that anyway. And people who are hungry for grace, which is most people, are going to be really glad that you were clear about your message and invited them in. So, Tom, I think online stuff is just amazing. And don't be afraid to tell people what you told them. Monday morning is the best time to tell people what happened on Sunday. I don't always know what's going to happen on Sunday until Saturday night or even in the middle of Sunday. But Monday morning, I can usually decide if I wanted to admit it or not. Anybody else? Questions, comments, thoughts?
I got a question.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Let's hear from Pastor Carolyn first.
Okay. I just wanted to, thanks for letting me talk. Like you had mentioned being an RIC church, and I think, you know, I know my congregation where I'm called in Shorewood, Wisconsin is RIC, and churches I find are always great with statements and mission and vision statements and guiding principles and all that stuff. And that's wonderful and all, but I always think that like frequent training should be happening within the congregation, or ushers and people who are kind of your front people who are there greeting people. Just because you have a statement doesn't mean that everybody's gets it right away. So I think there's work to be done. Yeah. I just wanted to say that's important. I see that.
It is important. Absolutely. You have to follow through. For example, we have an interesting dilemma in our town right now. Elgin's a city of about 125,000 people. So it's a moderately big place, but it's not like a Chicago. It's a mid-sized city. And on June 7th, the first Sunday in June is our annual Pride Parade in Elgin. So every first Sunday in June is Pride Parade. Unfortunately, it often overlaps with Synod Assembly, so you have to decide whether to be invested in that or go to Synod Assembly. This year it doesn't. We've got a bishop's election. It's a week apart. We still have people go, but the people at Synod Assembly can't. We also, this year, the March for Jesus is also in Elgin on June 7th. Mm-hmm. And the March for Jesus is a much more conservative. You have to believe in an inerrant and infallible Bible and all kinds of things. And so the March for Jesus people called us and invited us to be part of it. And I got the message. I have to call them back and say, I'm sorry, I can't, because we're going to be in the Pride Parade. And, and of course, the people with the March for Jesus, I think the Pride Parade is one of the things they're marching to kind of be an alternative to that, because they don't believe in that. So you have to put your foot forward, don't you? You have to live it. You have to show it. You have to teach people to engage people well. And when you screw up, you have to admit it and graciously process it and keep growing. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Carolyn. All right. Who was it? Elizabeth, you had something.
Yes, I am part of a larger congregation in a Milwaukee suburb. And this morning at Women's Bible Study, the leader pointed out that some of us come through nitwits. That's Knit wits, because we get together frequently and do our knitting and crocheting for charity, for our friends, for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And this lady came to Nitwits and found people she liked who were part of the church, and now she's a member of the church. So I'm really glad that what she found was what she wanted.
And that's a really important point, Elizabeth. You don't have to invite people primarily to Sunday morning. It's a great place to do it. We serve at a soup kettle every Tuesday night in our building. Actually, it's served here. And we find we get a lot of people who align with us because of serving is something that unchurched people still think is valuable. They can find their way in, and then they end up rubbing shoulders with mostly church people. We have a knitting group, prayer shawl circle, we call it, but they can knit and crochet, and they do more than prayer shawls. So a similar kind of group, people invite people there. We have a men's ministry group, people invite people there. We're getting ready to start Dinner Church, which is a different thing. We're going to be on Wednesday nights. Half of our team, hopefully by the time we get the dinner church started in March, half our team will be not members of our church, helping start it, which is very interesting. So you can invite people to anything. And frankly, if they're going to stick to your ministry, you have to invite them to something other than worship eventually.
Mhm.
You have to get into the knitting group or the soup kennel group or book study or whatever. People need people and community, and most Sunday morning worship alone is not enough. That if you can't invite them to something beyond Sunday worship, even if that's where they started, you're probably going to lose people because they still need relationships and a shared sense of connection and mission.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Great point. Very helpful. Anybody else? Well, then I want to say something about follow-up, which is sort of what I led into a little bit with Elizabeth. One of the most important and difficult things is when somebody comes, figuring out how to talk to them a second time and getting their contact information. And you just have to be somewhat hawkish. In a gracious, polite way. You can't like twist arms, and you're not there to spam and stalk people. But at the same time, you can't talk to somebody if you don't know how to have a conversation with them because you don't know where they are. And all too often we say, "Hey, did you get to talk to that person?" "Yeah, his name was John." "Okay." I'll look John up in the phone book or on the Anywho and see how many there are in Elgin. And did you get a last name? "Oh no." "Do you know where he lives?" "No, I didn't talk about that." And no email, no cell phone number, nothing. So we just have to do better. And so one of the things I would urge, a practice that's not in the book that I would urge, is greeters after the service. They might be more important than greeters before the service in some ways. Because if a person has walked in the door and you say, "Hey, you're new here, would you sign our book or fill out a contact card?" They haven't really decided whether they want you to know who they are yet. Now, you still should be friendly, and greeting and hospitality are important, but you understand it's kind of intrusive that somebody I haven't met, have had no experience with, wants my info. And we've all got enough garbage going through our cell phones even now. I mean, how many of you get text messages now from a gazillion people you never heard of because you did this or that, or they want this, or they're pretending to have a delivery from the post office and they want you to fill out this form so they can deliver it because they don't know where you live. Right. So it's hard to trust people with your information, isn't it? I mean, because we're sort of learning, don't tell anybody who you are. And I just got a new thing from DuckDuckGo that's upgraded their browser to be even more anonymous now because a lot of people are concerned about how Google and those use your information. So it's an advertising thing to say, "Hey, you can do this and you don't have to tell you who you are." But after a service, if they've had a friendly experience and they've talked to some people and you see they're kind of chatting with folks and they're smiling and they've relaxed, now if you say, "Hey, it's been really good to know you. I'd love to follow up and have another conversation. Could you leave me your cell phone number or an email?" Odds are really good if they've had a good experience. They're much more willing to do that at the end. So you have to be very intentional at the end. Your greeters should be at your welcome station and by the door and stuff after the service as much as before and say, "Hey, thanks so much for coming. I hope you had a great experience. We'd love to continue to get to know you. Would you be willing to just give us an email or a cell phone number?" You don't have to fill, and don't ask for their street address. Just one or two things. If they'll give you a cell phone or an email, you can follow up. And then if they don't want to be followed up with, they don't have to reply, right? But if you get 12 things and it's overwhelming, you need to fill out the phone number and the email and the street address. So keep it simple. And afterwards, just if people have had a good experience, they're going to want to tell you who they are. And if they come in nervous, they're going to not want to tell you who they are. So find ways to talk to people and follow up. And then Monday or even Sunday afternoon, if they gave you a cell phone, just a text message. Hi, and make sure it's from a church leader or the pastor. Hi, it was so good to meet you this morning. Hope you had a great experience. Looking forward to getting to know you better. Blessings, and then sign it, Pastor Dave, or whatever. And that whole process can be really helpful. And if somebody comes with somebody, like suppose Beth at St. Luke's decides that she's going to bring somebody, I know that she already knows their name and their address, probably, and contact information, because she brought somebody. So people that come with you got it. I don't need to get it from the person she brought. I can say, Beth, tell me about who you brought. How can we follow up and send them a thank you note? And then in that case, Greg, you've got a thing. You want Lynn to come off mic and tell us about it?
Well, I just would find it fruitful to ask folks that I was beginning to recognize coming on a Sunday or whenever, who do you know here? Because it began to ask that question about forming community. And often people, if they don't know somebody, I say, well, how did you happen to find this place? They'll have a story.
Mm-hmm.
It might just be online, but if you, I'd say more often than not, there's some connection, and then immediately you can begin to draw those connections and the formation of a community and the sense of welcome that is emerging. So I did have one funny moment on a Christmas Eve. You get all these people coming that you hardly see ever, but after a few Christmas Eves, you recognize even the strangers. And I found a moment to ask one guy, well, who do you know here? And he said, you. I had never spoken to him personally, but it was illuminating.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate that. So you can all do this. You just have to be more intentional. You have to have the conversations and prepare your people. There's a lot of people who think that you probably should have a 5-minute, I don't do this every month, but you should have a 5-minute piece in worship once a month to remind people and train people how to invite people. Remind people, hey, especially if something's coming up, pass out invitations for Easter, for a chili cook-off. We have a chili cook-off February 8th. That's one of the best places for people to invite people, because people like chili. And we've had people come to that and end up staying because they had a good time with people. They experienced community first and decided that the people that were in this church were worth spending time with, and maybe they could do it twice. So give people invitations to things and train them up and remind them they can take what, Tom said, you can do it afterwards. All those things really matter. You got a lot of power, and mostly it's just remembering the power you have and the intentionality of doing it.
I have found it helpful to say, I'm glad you're here. How did you find us?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Yeah. I asked that one last week. That's how I found out it was our Facebook page that they were looking for stuff. I mean, I didn't know. And it's like, okay, that's good. I guess we got to keep posting stuff on that Facebook page,
Yeah.
Dave, we're getting close to our hour time. I want to thank you for just your just this accessible commitment and connection to just helping us realize how doable it is. That confidence, just that confidence booster. So I'm I'm really grateful for that. And I want to encourage anybody that is looking for, again, just a tool to have these conversations and to kind of methodically think through it and yet generate the ideas like we did tonight, to really think about this resource. Or Dave's website is Day 8 Strategies. We'll be at the mission table. We'll be at the Synod Mission event, which is really a whole day for
my
this.
contact info if you want it.
Yeah.
That's my email. That's my website. If you stick workshop 10 in there, you'll get 10% off. There's discounts if you buy them. So, and if you put your email and name in the chat, if you're going to be on the blog or email, I'm getting ready to put a new site called invitationalchristian.com. It'll be out hopefully before Lent starts. So if you want to put it in the chat, we can save the chat and we'll make sure that we get you the stuff as well. But that's my email. I'm glad to talk with any of you. Send me an email. I'll send you a time we can chat on the phone if you want, or something. It's no problem. It's God's church. We've got the best stuff to share. We just need to do do a little bit of stuff and amazing things happen, because God doesn't take a lot of stuff to do amazing things. I heard mustard seeds even were enough.